if you're a Canadian who's chosen not to go to the US, well, they have the old Cheeto fascist in charge down there.
Many MAGA farmers put their livelihoods on the line for Trump. They believed he would protect their farms, their markets, and the way of life their families had preserved for generations. But that promise is slowly turning into a nightmare. The policies that were supposed to save farmers are now squeezing the life out of them. Their crops are harder to sell, workers are in short supply, and the cost of equipment and supplies keeps going up. They are earning less, taking on more debt, and using their family's money, time, and even property just to keep the farm from slipping away. Now, some of them are starting to get angry. They say this outcome is nothing like what they were promised and nothing like what they thought they were voting for. But did they really not know what could happen? Or did they hear the warnings but believe the consequences would only fall on some other family, some other industry, or some other community? Today, let's take a look at the signs that some MAGA farmers are starting to rethink their expectations while also breaking down what is happening to the money, the workforce, and the future of family farms. And in the end, we will see whether Trump really protected farmers through actual results or only through campaign season promises. The crops get sold, but there is still not enough money to cover the costs. Maybe the most painful thing for a farmer is not having a bad harvest. It is seeing the corn grow well and selling every bit of it only to end the year with a negative bank balance. Yes, you heard that right. 30 acres of corn brought in more than $23,000 in revenue. After paying for seed fuel, fertilizer equipment, insurance, harvesting, and transportation, there was still $5,610 in gross profit. At this point, you might be thinking, well, he still made money. I used to look at numbers like these the same way. But then the interest on the land loan, principal payments, and property taxes were added in. The final result Spencer shared was negative cash flow of about $11,000. To put it very simply, revenue is all the money from sales. Profit is what is left after every bill has been paid. A field can bring in tens of thousands of dollars, but that does not mean the family that owns it gets to take all that money home. Just look at who gets paid first. The seed seller, the fertilizer supplier, the insurance company, the transportation company, the bank, and the person growing the corn is at the very end of the line waiting to see whether anything is left. And this is where I cannot pretend to be surprised. Some MAGA farmers once believed that simply putting domestically made products first would automatically benefit American producers. It sounds perfectly reasonable. The corn is grown in America and sold in America, so the money should stay with American farmers, right? But does the money really stay with them? The flag on the packaging does not pay for fuel. The slogan "Buy American" does not make loan interest disappear. And a high-yielding harvest does not guarantee that the selling price will cover every cost. I do not know who Spencer voted for, so I am not going to label him as MAGA, but his situation exposes the exact weakness in that expectation. Selling American goods does not mean the Americans who produce them are making a profit. Think about it one step further. This was a year when he harvested 210 bushels per acre. If prices are lower next season, fertilizer costs more, or the machinery needs major repairs. What will cover the shortfall savings, a second job, or another loan? At least Spencer was still able to sell his corn. Some other farmers have it even worse. Their crops are sitting in storage, but the buyers are no longer there like they used to be. Orders are dropping and crops are sitting in storage. If the assumption that someone will always buy whatever farmers produce is no longer true, then where is all that food supposed to go? The tomatoes have been packed into boxes. The corn is already in the silo. The rice is sitting in storage. From the outside, it looks like the season is over, but for farmers, harvesting is only the first half of the job. The other half is finding someone willing to pay for it. Some MAGA farmers supported tighter tariffs because the promise sounded easy to believe. Foreign goods would become more expensive, products made in America would have an advantage, and American growers would finally be protected. I understand why they believed it. It is like closing some of the doors to your competitors and waiting for customers to automatically walk into your store instead. But one very important detail was overlooked. American agriculture does not just need to limit foreign goods coming in, it also needs foreign customers to keep buying American goods. Soybean, rice, corn, alfalfa, and honey producers do not operate on a large scale just to sell around town. They need orders from Mexico, Canada, China, and many other markets. A warehouse full of crops may look like an asset, but try driving a truckload of corn to the bank and saying, "I have not sold it yet, but just count this corn as my payment for the month." You probably already know how the bank employee would look at you, and international buyers are under no obligation to sit around waiting for Washington to change its mind. When trade becomes unpredictable, they can cut their orders, demand a different price, or find new suppliers. Brazil and other countries do not need great speeches. They just need to deliver the right product at the right price and at the right time. Honestly, I used to think international customers were like a light switch. They turn it off today, and once tensions cool down tomorrow, they will turn it back on. But put yourself in the buyer's position. You have spent months finding new suppliers, signing new contracts, hiring new ships, and rearranging the entire shipping route. Would you cancel all of that just to come right back? That is the real fear. It is not just losing today's orders. It is possibly losing your place on next year's supplier list too. We warned that tariffs could lead to retaliation, that customers could take their money to another field. And now the question is very simple. If this policy really protects growers, why are some of them still watching their storage facilities fill up without knowing who will buy what is inside? Even worse, when they do find a buyer, the machinery replacement parts and other things they need for the next growing season are getting more expensive. Machinery costs more and farmers put off investing. After hearing this, what caught my attention was not just how expensive the machinery has become. What is even more concerning is that it forces farmers to rethink every decision they make on the farm. Put yourself in their shoes. The money from selling crops may not be steady. Orders could drop. Loan interest still has to be paid. Meanwhile, the equipment that needs to be replaced is no longer affordable. What would you do? Most likely, you would keep using the machine you already have for one more season, and that is when everything starts getting pushed back. The new machine does not get bought. Some repairs that are not truly urgent get put off. The storage building does not get renovated. Expansion plans go on hold. The extra worker they plan to hire does not get hired. Each decision by itself sounds reasonable. Holding on to cash when the future is hard to predict is clearly the cautious choice. But when everything gets delayed at the same time, the farm slowly loses its ability to grow and respond when something goes wrong. This is the contradiction I think a lot of people overlooked when they supported tariffs. Tariffs do not just have the potential to affect what farmers sell, they can also affect some of the things farmers have to buy, including replacement parts, components, materials, packaging, and equipment tied to international supply chains. To put it more simply, farmers can struggle to find buyers while also paying more just to keep producing. I understand holding on to an old piece of equipment. When the replacement costs too much, the machine you already have suddenly becomes much harder to let go of. But on a farm, the question is not just whether the machine can still run, it is also whether it is reliable enough to get the job done at the right time. So what do you think? Is putting off the purchase really saving the farm money, or is it just pushing an even bigger bill into the next season? And if you own the farm, what would you cut first? Machinery repairs, expansion plans, or a new job position? Because when farmers cannot invest in more equipment, they have to depend more heavily on labor. But the workers they need out in the fields are also getting harder and harder to find. Labor shortages could mean missing the harvest. The jobs that were promised would go back to Americans were not filled when the cherry orchard reached the most important week of the harvest. Around $250,000 to $300,000 US in revenue was left hanging in the orchard. The workers who should have been paid to pick that fruit also lost that income. About half of Ian Chandler's regular crew did not show up. He needed dozens of replacement workers right in the middle of the season, but the number of people he needed did not arrive in time. This is not about whether an American can do the job of picking cherries. Of course they can learn. The problem is that the farm does not need just one person. It needs an entire crew to show up within a few days, work enough hours, and keep up the pace from the very first morning. Cherries do not ripen according to a hiring schedule. When the whole orchard is ready to be harvested, every day of delay means more fruit becomes overripe, gets soft, or no longer meets the standards for sale. I tried putting myself in the shoes of someone looking for work. I would have to travel to a different rural area, arrange my own transportation, housing, and daily living expenses, do physically demanding work for a few weeks, and then look for another job when the season ends. Simply saying the jobs are there does not make those problems disappear. Seasonal crews have built their entire lives around the harvest schedule. They know when to move, how fast to work, and how to handle the fruit without bruising it. When an entire crew does not show up, the farm owner cannot quickly throw together a few dozen people who have never worked together and expect productivity to stay the same. And this is where the promise runs into the actual results. Immigrant workers did not show up in full numbers, but there were no long lines of local workers coming in to replace them either. The jobs were not transferred from one group to another. Some of the work simply did not get done. We were told that removing immigrant workers would create more opportunities for Americans. But in this case, the clearest result was not new opportunities. It was unpicked fruit, lost revenue, and wages that did not go to anyone. The damage keeps spreading to packing houses, truck drivers, and businesses that depend on the harvest season. And the work that cannot be left undone usually falls on the farming families themselves. When they do not have enough money to invest in new machinery and cannot find enough workers, either they are left with only one choice. They have to do more of the work themselves, work longer days, and find additional sources of income to keep the farm running. Working multiple jobs, farm families are starting to burn out. At this point, all the consequences start falling on the people who are still holding the farm together. When there are not enough workers, the unfinished work does not just disappear. Some families have to fill those gaps themselves. The husband spends more time out in the fields. The wife keeps another steady-paying job to cover the bills. The kids come home to help on weekends. Jobs they once paid other people to do now become part of the whole family's schedule. And just like that, the work on the farm no longer stops when the sun goes down. After finishing their jobs away from the farm, they still have to check the machinery, handle paperwork, call buyers, figure out fuel costs, or get ready for the next day. The evening is no longer time to rest, it becomes the next work shift. I used to think that when someone had 2 jobs, it meant they were trying to earn extra money and build a better life. But in cases like these, the second job sometimes only helps them hold on to what they already have. The paycheck from that outside job is not being used for vacations or home improvements. It may go straight toward insurance, loan payments, machinery repairs, or basic living expenses while they wait for the money from the harvest to come in. To put it simply, the farm is being kept alive by income earned somewhere else. Just imagine finishing an 8-hour workday only to have the family's main work begin afterward. Doing that for a few days is exhausting. When it goes on for weeks, they get less sleep, spend less time together, and still have to make important decisions when their minds are already overloaded. That does not mean every family is falling apart, but it shows that the cost no longer fits neatly into an income and expense statement. It shows up in late dinners, postponed appointments, and the constant feeling that there is always more work left undone. I still believe that many of them made the wrong choice. A vote does not disappear just because the consequences become more painful. But now that Price has the face of a spouse, a child, and the people who have to carry a burden they never voted to take on. Working another job may help a family hang on. But before the next season begins, they will still need money for seed fertilizer, fuel, and equipment repairs. And that brings us to the next question. Do they still have enough money to start over? Farmers may not have enough money for next season. Right now, what determines whether farmers can make it into the next season is not how much land they own. It is whether they still have enough money in the bank to start over. The new season has not brought in a single dollar yet, but the money already has to go out first. For seed fertilizer, fuel machinery, repairs, workers, insurance, land rent, and loan payments that are coming due. Meanwhile, last season's crops may still be sitting in storage. Equipment that needs to be replaced is still being patched up. Money earned from outside jobs has to be moved back into the farm just to cover the bills they have right now. From the road, the family still has land tractors and storage buildings. No one has put up a bankruptcy sign, but assets are not the same as cash. You can own a farm worth a lot of money and still not have enough cash to buy fertilizer next week. To get money out of the land, you have to sell part of it, use it as collateral, or borrow more. None of those choices is easy. The problem is that a farm can still own plenty of assets while the cash available for the next season keeps getting thinner. The land is still there and the machinery is still there, but the bills have to be paid with cash. To put it simply, the farm may look wealthier on paper, but the amount of money actually available for the season is getting smaller. Still, this does not mean all of American agriculture is on the verge of collapse. Land prices are still relatively stable, most loans are still being paid on time, and many farms still have a strong enough foundation to keep going. The pressure is not falling equally on everyone. It hits harder for farms growing crops with thin profit margins, carrying a lot of debt, or waiting too long to get paid for what they sold. Just one more season of slow sales, one major machine breakdown, or another increase in production costs could force them to scale back their plans for next season. I do not need to see them lose their land to understand that the situation is already serious. It is enough to see a family sitting around the kitchen table choosing between borrowing more, selling off some assets, or planting less. And once those choices start coming up, people will have to take another look at the policies they once supported. Some MAGA farmers are starting to rethink their expectations. When a family has to consider borrowing more, selling some of its assets, or planting less, policy is no longer something people just debate on television. It has entered their home through very real bills. That is also when some MAGA farmers start talking differently than they did before. They complain about tariffs, labor shortages, export markets, and production costs. Things that were once described as temporary hardships are now directly affecting their ability to keep the farm running. I understand why many people do not want to offer them any more sympathy. When the hardship was happening to someone else, it could be called the necessary price. But when the bill arrives at their own address, it suddenly becomes a crisis that Washington needs to fix right away. And yes, the feeling of "we warned you" is completely understandable here. But I also do not think standing by and laughing while a family loses its income is the answer. What matters more is what they are learning from this. Are they truly reconsidering their views, or do they just want the policy to make an exception for their own industry? Because there is a huge difference between those two reactions. Someone might say, this policy is causing harm and we need to change it. But they might also say, this policy is still right, but my farm should be compensated. Those two statements may sound almost the same when the bills are coming in, but they lead to completely different conclusions. Honestly, I have seen people defend a decision much longer than they should, simply because admitting they misjudged it is too difficult. When that choice is tied to friends, family, church, and the entire community, one losing season may not be enough to change everything. So the second question is even harder. Does opposing one specific policy mean they will change their political choice? We cannot answer that for sure yet. Some people may truly be reconsidering their old expectations. Others may only want 8 exemptions or a better deal while keeping the same political loyalty. That uncertainty is exactly what makes this worth watching. The price has become high enough to create doubt, but it may not be high enough to change their vote. Whether they change their minds or not, a farm does not operate in a sealed room. Its money, jobs, and food move through the entire community. And when a farm scales back, the next bill will reach many people who never cast that vote. If farms scale back, how will our lives be affected? A farm does not have to shut down completely to make an entire town poorer. All it takes is for the farm owner to plant less, hire fewer people, and stop spending the way they used to, and money starts disappearing from the community. Truck drivers get fewer loads, packing houses cut hours, parts stores lose orders, mechanics get less work. The nearby restaurant also loses the families who used to stop by on weekends. The restaurant owner does not need to know who his customers voted for. He only knows there are a few more empty tables on Friday night. And when a farm family can no longer afford its loan payments, their land does not disappear. It gets sold, leased out for the long term, or handed over to another operator. The question I always ask is this right when the seller desperately needs money who has enough cash to buy? I do not believe every land sale is part of some conspiracy. Not every farm that changes hands immediately ends up owned by a corporation. But the person trying to pay off debt and the person who already has capital clearly do not enter the negotiation with the same advantage. The farm family may not have enough time to wait for a better price. The bank does not stop sending bills just because the last season was rough. Meanwhile, a large farm, an agricultural business, or a landholding company can afford to wait, borrow money, and buy several properties at once. For one side, it is a way out of debt that is coming due. For the other, it is an opportunity to expand. The land may still be farmed after it changes hands. Production may not even fall right away. But what matters is not just what continues to grow there. It is who decides how the land is used, who signs the contracts, and whether the final profit stays in town or gets sent to an office somewhere else. As ownership becomes more concentrated, it gets even harder for young people to buy land and get started. The small farms that remain also have less bargaining power with suppliers, processors, and major buyers. Then the consequences reach us in very ordinary ways: fewer jobs, weaker local businesses, longer trips to reach essential services, and food prices that are harder to predict. You may have never stepped into a field, but you are still part of that chain every time you buy food, get your car repaired, or wait for a shipment. I still believe many mega farmers made the wrong choice, but the bill does not stop with the people who cast that vote. It keeps moving on to workers, neighbors, and families who never supported that policy. So this final part is not about arguing over who deserves more sympathy. What matters is understanding what farmers and their families can still do to reduce their risks before the next season. A plan to help farmers and their families reduce risk before next season. I would not end this video without making one thing clear. Even though a family cannot fix trade policy, machinery prices, or the labor market on its own, it can still know exactly which risks are coming its way. The first step is not buying more machinery or taking out another loan. It is taking an honest look at the next 90 days. Which crops have already been sold? What is still sitting in storage? Which customers have only made verbal promises? Which bills will come due before the new season starts bringing in revenue? I do not care how wealthy the farm looks from the road. What matters is what money will actually reach the bank account and which bills have to be paid first. Next, do not put the entire season in the hands of one buyer. An old customer may come back, but they may not. Ask early about contracts, delivery dates, and payment schedules. Check whether a cooperative processing plant or local buyer can take part of the harvest. Having another option may not help you make more money, but it can keep you from getting trapped. With machinery, separate everything clearly. Which equipment has to be repaired right away because it affects safety in the growing season? Which equipment can still be used but needs to be watched? Which purchases are only for expansion plans and can be delayed? Keeping an old machine is not always a mistake. The mistake is keeping it without knowing who you will call when it breaks down, where you can rent another machine, and how much money you will need. Labor also has to be confirmed before the crops are ready. Who is definitely coming? Who needs housing or transportation? Which jobs require experienced workers? Do not wait until harvest week to start making phone calls. Finally, the family has to set limits. How much more money can you put in? How much more debt can you handle? When do you need to plant less instead of trying to hold on to everything? Working more hours does not always mean you are saving the farm. Sometimes you're only putting off a difficult decision. This plan does not guarantee that everything will be okay, but it helps the family keep control of its choices before the bank. The market or an unexpected bill makes those choices for them. In the end, the warnings that were once dismissed as pessimistic are now showing up in storage buildings, out in the fields, and on the dinner tables of farm families. America cannot keep going by demanding cheap food, cheap labor, and expecting farmers to carry every risk on their own. And behind all of this is an even greater danger. As family farms grow weaker, land ownership, jobs, and control over food will slowly become concentrated in fewer hands. MAGA promised to give control back to the American people, but the results should be measured by what people were able to keep, not by the slogans they heard. So the final question is no longer whether Trump loves farmers. It is whether his policies helped them stay on their feet or made them more vulnerable. Share what is happening in your local community. We need to listen to one another so we can recognize the consequences before it is too late. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you can keep following what is really happening in American life.